One thing I didn't want to talk about before we get into hot seats, I want to kind of keep it brief. Hopefully, I can keep it brief. But it really has to do with like what attracts your partner back. Oh, I hate that word. Sorry. What attracts your spouse back? Or if you guys see some guys are just in like common word relationships here, it attracts your significant other back. I think like I think a lot of guys, and this is why I kind of like drill it into you guys while we're going through this. But I think a lot of guys say that they're not focusing on the outcome, right? And like are all about it, saying that they're unhooking and all of that good stuff. But then they, kind of slip into it every so often. And especially when the winds come in or like the peaks come in, and you got to be a little bit careful because here we go, some more people. You got to be really careful with this process. Okay, like there's always going to be peaks and valleys. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because, I've had some guys who are, there we go. See, look at we got stragglers coming. I've got guys who, have saved their relationships, and then sometimes they'll, and I'm really careful about who I interview during these processes because, or like what interviews we release after I listen to them, whether I take the interview or our care consultant takes the interview or care manager takes the interview. And while you're going through this process, one of the biggest things that I tell you guys is unhooking. Like if you want me to really boil it down, okay. If you guys don't know what this chart is, that should be a big red flag to you, okay. But if you go look at the marriage roadmap that's in the turnaround program, if you go watch that video, there's about four sections. Yeah, four sections on the side, and then a literal whole winding snake-like roadmap, which I'm going to refine just to make it a little bit more simplistic for you guys. And the whole process can be broken up into that. It's breaking old patterns, both mental and actual patterns, emotional patterns for how you guys operate. It's the healing process, right? Which is understanding where the bleeding is, not only for your spouse or your significant other, but also for yourself. Okay. That's where the mantra comes in, which is one of the most powerful tools you can have in reinforcing your subconscious. I even think I talk about how, and if you're not doing this, you definitely should, is not only should you say your mantra and like literally memorize it to where you can just do the mirror work, but you should be able to record your mantra and you should fall asleep to it because that's where your subconscious will really pick up that inner programming. That's why I'm very big on you guys posting those mantras so that I can help you reinforce them because you have to be careful with the I ams. Because at the same time, you're also saying, I'm not, right? So you can be kind of stuck, right? So like the biggest thing that the best way that I can describe this is when I've had Marines it did not matter how high ranking they were. There's a saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. And that's because they've identified themselves as thus, which they kind of have to because of war and everything. But that's besides the point. But that's an identity that's really hard for them to shake, like extremely hard for them to shake. And it's not that, you are a Marine. It's that you experienced this period of life where you wore the title Marine, right? It's making sure that it's not just like holistically you, right? So when you're going through this whole process, you have to go slow in the beginning because I know everybody wants to jump, and I've debated whether I should lock out the modules so that you guys are kind of forced to go in order. But that would just kind of F up some people who are already through it or have a little bit farther in the process, so I haven't done it quite yet. But I can tell depending on Voxers I get. But while you're going through this, okay, breaking those mental patterns and then focusing on the emotional healing part to build you up and then start to kind of excavate is going to be really important because as people who have been in this for a while, we're not passive here, right? And what you've learned about other things in therapy or anything, that's okay as like a back burner. Don't let it get involved and don't let it kind of mix in with what we do here because I've refined this process with a lot of therapists who are upset at the whole industry of therapy because it's all incentivized and you just staying in it. Let me admit this person. Staying in it and being stuck in it, right? When people say that they've been with their therapist for 20 years, I'm like, okay, that's probably should look for a different therapist. Because I've, especially when I was in the military, I've gone through it for certain things. And it has its place. There are certain therapies that do work, but in general, sometimes it could be a loaded gun. And you might shoot yourself in the foot. Because especially during the healing process, you need to be having those conversations or just excavating right before we get into boundary setting, which is in the shifting and the whole bonding process, because you don't want to create that codependence between you and a third party. You want to lead, right? So recap, grossly summing it up, breaking those mental patterns, healing both yourself, like the way you talk to yourself, and what's going on with the initial trauma bleeding, okay? Shifting, turning those negatives into positives so that you can plant those seeds, grow yourself even more into a Renaissance man, become irreplaceable, and dance and thrive in the fire. Because then when you get into the bonding process, right, it's not just over there. This is why I tell you guys, because I'll get a lot of guys who come in initially and they'll be like, we're all here for the same thing. I'm like, yes, I understand that you want to save your relationship, you want to save your marriage. Yes, of course, that's what we're going to do. But that shouldn't be at the forefront. The forefront should be trusting this process, going through this process, building this process up, starting to love the journey. Because then if you have that hunter mindset and you're like, all right, cool, what's the next step so I can keep going into for the kill instead of taking a step back and going, okay, what is really going on here? What am I really working on? What am I really building up? And then falling in love with that, because this is a very deeply transformative process. It can be frustrating at times because it's not necessarily esoteric, right? But this is a lot of information for you to understand, right? Like, for instance, I don't know how many times I've reread these books, right? Like Iron John, I've read it umpteenth times. Psycho-Cybernetics, I've read God knows how many. The Way of the Superior Man, I think I'm going to go on my maybe 8th read through this year. I plan to reread it actually very soon. And the reason why I'm honing in on this, because one, Mark's not going to be here this week, but next week, congratulations to him. He's seeing a big win. I want to shout out Air. Air had a huge win, right? I want to give a shout out to Jacob. He keeps seeing wins within himself, and he's a lot farther along in that process than I think he realizes. But we can also chat about it. I see he's there, and you have to just. And the reason why, real quick, the reason why I shout out Mark is because when all people would say, give up, fuck it, your wife's with another man, why don't you just, completely give up, go find another? Well, that doesn't help anything, right? So there's one thing and there's one concept that I'll hound on in a second. But sometimes in life, where seasons, sometimes in these lives, we have seasons. Sometimes in these seasons, our partner falls behind us or our partner runs ahead of us. I don't even like saying partner, significant other. We'll say significant other, spouse, just because there's a couple more guys who just, like I said, common wed. And, it's very easy, especially in today's society, to forego with like instant gratification. All right, well, I'll just move on to the next one. But then that marriage, that relationship ends time and time again the same way, or it rhymes very, very similar. And so while you're going through this process, especially when you get towards the shifting into the bonding and you're thriving in that fire, that internal work that you do, right? That work to fall in love with this and just be like, all right, I'm just going to be irreplaceable, right? That's what creates that gap from where you were and where your significant other or your wife, your spouse thinks you're at and where you're really at. And when you demonstrate that by action, because remember, I can tell you what to say, right? Just to kind of give you that confidence in the moment. But your word as a man is all we have. But it's not just a word. Talk is cheap. It's that action that supports the word. It's how you show up, right? So like if your wife is stonewalling, if your wife is getting really fiery with you, the way that you can just sit back, smile, and embrace it and get excited about it, that shows a lot more, right, than what's most people would deal with, right? Most people get frustrated, leave, but this journey has to be about you and your process to build up, because as you get past, like I said, some guys have hit me up and with a little bit of frustration. You've gone through this growth because a catalyst event that happened. Okay. I teach you a lot here. You go through the process, you learn to fall in love with it. But falling in love with it is also realizing the feminine is shaped by the environment. Okay. And some of us want to go, oh, why isn't my wife like catching up? Why isn't she doing this too? Well, remember, in order to successfully go through the frameworks in true active listening, not only do you paraphrase, right, say in your own words, but you take it deeper, and that's why we have decoding her why. But in that depth, you have to truly understand why your wife is doing or going through what she's going through right now, because of the environment that she went through and that shaped her as a kid, a teenager, or a kid, honestly, I'll even go farther back, a baby, okay, a pre-tween, or a kid, a toddler, a kid, a preteen, a teen, young adult, so on and so forth, right? Because like, for instance, even think about it like this, right? I had this thought. It's quite sad. Some people just, back in the day when TV was like, man, I remember watching cartoons on Saturdays. Now they're available on YouTube, and people put the creepiest, weirdest shit on YouTube. But the saddest thing is when I see people put a newborn kid who could barely see I've seen it. I've been like, oh my God, that baby can't even be a year yet. They mount the stroller with a device that's meant to cause anxiety and you to be fixated on it so that you'll keep watching, and they just bombard this person. Your spouse could have gone through the same thing. I think it's called like sovereign neglect or something like that. With, latchkey kids, it's also another thing, right? Where you just kind of did your own thing while your parents were at work. You came home, you opened the door, okay, made yourself a sandwich, watched TV, did some homework, so on and so forth. You got to think of what that does to certain people, because not everybody's going to respond the same way. So while you're going through this and your growth is happening, you also have to take a step back and be humble, because right now in this season, and if you look at it as seasons, right, that's what made 70-year, 60-year, 50-year plus marriages last long, is when they realize, like, hey, well, this is a season that we got to get through. Okay. This season right now, you might be leaps and bounds ahead of your significant other, right? But that's where you also have to check yourself, because that's where your leadership comes through. And you got to be careful of validation seeking, because that person has gone through trauma or has gone through the decay of Maslow's hierarchy, as we talk about. And then now you're rebuilding it up. And you got to be careful of not falling back into that hunter mentality of like, oh, and try to push off the blame and try to focus outside of your locus of control. Because during this process, everything happens for you. Okay? Not against you. And I know it sounds wild, but sometimes the most horrendous things have to happen in order for the best things to happen. Right? That's just the way of life. I wish it didn't happen like that, but it's a paradox, right? Sometimes the most beautiful memories and the most beautiful growth happens out of destruction. And we see this in nature. I think one of the most beautiful flowers actually comes from the cracks of molten lava, like destroying whole fields. And it just pops up, right? So as you're going through this, you have to really focus on understanding that this is for you to build you up. Of course, we want to save the marriage, but you can't, though, like I said, that there's that paradox. You can't focus on that reconciliation, because your wife is going to get scared. I'm telling you, I don't care what your situation is. Fear is one of the deepest driving factors of the relationship. So, like, for instance, if it's cheating, if it's, just stonewalling, if it's just your wife being very explosive, a lot of people operate off of fear. Remember, that fear comes from a loss. A lot of people in this world, especially nowadays with how people talk to each other, it's all over the news, it's all over Facebook, it's all over Instagram, Twitter, all of that stuff. There's a lot of negative pockets out there where a lot of people are trained, literally, to think in a loss. Like, look what's happening over in fucking California. My home state, my ex-home state. I'm a recovered Californian, turned Floridian. It's crazy. And I'm not even talking about politics here. I'm just talking about like the stuff that I know from being in the military and whatnot. Nothing is ever not on purpose, right? So you just got to have more compassion for people. Okay. And so that's what's going to really reinforce this process. And that's what's really going to help you guys realize slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And the difference between, and there's really no difference between like Conrad, Don, Brian, a bunch of other guys, Shane, Mark. There is no difference, or I think John S. Like, there's no difference between how fast they saved their stuff and you guys. It's just that they surrendered to the process, right? Surrendering is not boot on your neck, right? Like how your wife needs to surrender into your feminine. It's not boot on your neck. It's not giving in, like, oh, no, it's surrendering. It's that willingness of energy, letting that energy flow through you. And then going through the steps practicing posting, which, by the way, I will shout out Andrew. I know there's a lot of Facebook posts I gotta I gotta give you feedback on, and I will shout out everybody who's been posting for feedback while I've been traveling. So kudos to you guys. Okay. Now, that's where this whole process is very transformative because when you learn to love the journey instead of the destination, so much can happen. You can literally turn the tide of any negative scenario and think about what gain comes from this. Like, me and my wife went to the YMCA. She was going to go swim with a little dude. I was going to go work out, but the lightning and all the storms, she couldn't. So we dropped him off at the daycare, let him go play because he was excited to play. And then she couldn't work out. And I was like, okay, well, just go have time to yourself. Like, what do you gain from this? Right. So she went, she did her own thing. Now, if you just let yourself defeat yourself and go, oh, God, through the whole process, oh, man, peaks and valleys, remember? And you just get defeated in those valleys, well, you're not going to be able to break up those patterns. You're not going to be able to heal. You're not going to be able to shift and build up that renaissance man. And then when you guys bond and you grow that bond, you can only force something to grow so far. And that's where that natural has to happen. And I think Austin talked about it a couple weeks ago. You got to be careful shifting back into that hunter mindset, focusing on the destination, that outcome. And yeah, that's the biggest thing I've seen this week, right? Fall in love with the process, understand things are happening for you. If you're lost, go back to the roadmap. If you don't know what the roadmap is, that's a red flag. And follow the steps. And if you need any guidance or anything like that, that's what I'm here for. That's what Voxer's here for. And if anyone could attest, I usually don't do Voxers late at night. While I was traveling, I had to. It was horrible. I think I didn't go to bed past 12. Like I went to bed at 12 every Voxer night to try to make sure to catch up with all you guys, But that's what we're here for. Also, that's what the community is here for. So if you see someone else post, comment. Actually, by the way, this is for you guys. This is huge. The reason why you want to comment and help other people through the thing that they're going through, whether it's feedback, requests, anything, okay? You're all going through it together. You create an even deeper feedback loop for yourself. If you can teach it, you will understand the subject matter even deeper, and lightning bolts will just go off in your head. Go, oh. If you just learn passively, you're not really absorbing. If you learn actively, you are, okay? Then, if you're able to help people with you, you learn it even more. Then when you're able to actually tutor those and help those guys through it, kind of like coaching them or teaching them, it cements even further, okay? And that's what creates a win mentality, and that's what creates actually a group momentum. Okay. Because a lot of people like to take. Remember, not from, but want for. But if you start to give, you'll start to see that energy flow of exchange. That's why I don't really hold anything back on like YouTube videos or posts or anything like that, because the more you try to, and this is a little more woo-woo, but I think you guys will like this because this is like Man of Steel mindset stuff. I might make a module about this, but the more that you try to, and this is also goes in, by the way, to the, if you guys are there, to the desire, creating that desire. Okay. But the more that you want for and you release that energy and you have those feedback loops with other people, well, your thoughts and ideas don't get stuck inside of you. They're able to go through like a refinement process. Okay. And you can look at it as a refinery. You know, information comes in, you speak it to someone else or put it out there. It gets refined through a process. Like, let's say I'm talking to Noel. Let's say I'm talking to Andrew. Let's say I'm talking to Chris. Let's say I'm talking to Daniel. Right. And he goes, oh, I never thought about it like that. This is how I thought about it. Then I'll go, oh, okay, perfect. This is the correct way of thinking. This is where it can improve. This is where let's quell that. Let's kind of tone that down. And then they can ask another question. Why? Boom, perfect. Let me tell you. Okay. And that's what keeps that refinery process going, especially amongst yourselves while you're in it. Okay. So don't learn in isolation. And if someone asks for help or is going through it, one, you guys could probably feel it in the post. You're like, oh man, this guy's down bad. But two, the more you help them, you're actually really helping yourself as well. So it's kind of like a selfish, selfless thing. Very interesting. So I thought you guys would get some use out of that knowledge, right? We're a brotherhood for a reason. We've all gone through it. Okay. And what I don't want you guys to do is go through this process and be like, all right, cool. Right? Remember that end zone illusion. And then things pop up and your wife was afraid things were going to pop up again and they kind of slip. We don't want that. That's why I want you guys to really focus on the process, on the journey. Okay. There's a couple of modules where I'm like, okay, think of the outcome, but now rein it back in for the specific exercises that we go through. But that's more in the shifting Renaissance man type process.